The air in Blackwood Cemetery was cold. It held the kind of damp chill that settled deep in the bones, a permanent resident of the shaded earth and aging stone. Alistair Sterling felt it, but he did not mind. He came here once a year. Every year on this same day. His driver waited by the polished black car at the iron gates, a silent, unmoving sentinel. His man, Marco, stood a respectful 20 paces behind him, a ghost in a tailored grey coat. They knew the ritual. They knew not to speak. Not to intrude. Alistair stood before two modest headstones, side by side. Eleonora Russo. Antonio Russo. His mother. His father. He laid a simple bouquet of white lilies at the base of each. He did not pray. He did not speak. He just stood there, a man carved from granite, letting the silence and the cold wash over him. This was the one place his power meant nothing. The one place he was not Mr. Sterling, the titan of industry, the man who moved markets with a whisper. Here, he was just a son. The wind rustled the dry leaves, a sound like paper scraping on pavement. It was in that quiet moment that he heard another sound. A soft scraping. A gentle brushing. He turned his head slowly. Further down the same row, a woman was on her knees. Her coat was thin, worn at the elbows. A faded scarf covered her hair. She was cleaning a headstone. Not with the careless haste of a paid groundskeeper, but with a slow, meticulous tenderness. She had a small bucket of water and a soft brush. She dipped the brush, and with gentle, circular motions, she worked away the grime and moss that clung to the engraved letters. It was an act of devotion. An act of love. Alistair watched her for a long moment. People hired the desperate to tend graves. A few dollars to keep a memory clean. It was a common enough sight. But something about her posture, the focused reverence of her work, held his attention. Marco shifted his weight, a subtle signal. Time to go. The world of the living, and its demands, awaited. Alistair ignored him. He took a step, then another, his expensive leather shoes making no sound on the soft earth. He moved parallel to the row of stones, his path taking him closer to the kneeling woman. She did not notice him. She was lost in her task, whispering to the stone. The words were too soft for him to hear, carried away by the breeze. He stopped a few feet away, his gaze falling upon the headstone she was so carefully tending. The stone was newer than his parents', but weathered by 2 decades of seasons. The brushing had made the name clear. Brilliantly, shockingly clear. Alistair Russo. His own name. His eyes locked onto it. The world tilted on its axis. Beneath the name, a date of birth. His date of birth. And beneath that, a date of death. 20 years ago. To the day. Alistair stopped breathing. The cold in the air was nothing compared to the ice that flooded his veins. He was looking at his own grave. A lie carved in stone. A monument to a man who had never died, but had simply vanished. Marco, seeing his boss freeze, took a half-step forward, his hand instinctively moving inside his coat. A threat? Was this woman a threat? Alistair raised a single hand. A small, almost imperceptible gesture. But Marco understood it perfectly. Stop. Do not move. Do not speak. Do not touch her. The woman finished her work. She wiped the stone dry with a soft cloth, her touch as gentle as a caress. She leaned forward and pressed her fingers against the engraved name. There, she whispered, and this time he heard it. All clean for you, Alistair. 20 years. I still remember. Alistair felt the words like a physical blow. He did not know this woman. He could not place her face. But she knew his name. She remembered him. And she was tending the grave of a ghost. Stay with me until the end, because what happens next will change not only her life, but will force this powerful man to confront the past he buried 2 decades ago. I think you'll love this story. So if you do, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more content just like this. And let us know in the comments where you're watching from today. We love to see how far our stories travel. Now, let's get back to it. Alastair Russo was a dead man. Or rather, the man known as Alastair Russo was. He had died on a rainy Tuesday 2 decades ago, his car reportedly found at the bottom of a ravine, consumed by fire. There was no body to recover. Just a scorched piece of metal and a name crossed off the city's list of problems. That was the official story. The real story was much simpler and far more complex. Alastair Russo had been the heir to a certain kind of throne. A kingdom built on shadows and fear, on loyalty enforced by violence. His father, Antonio, had been a man of the old ways. Honor among thieves, a strict code, a clear line between business and the sanctity of the innocent. When Antonio died, the throne passed to Alastair. But the world was changing. New players had entered the game. Men with no code. Men driven by pure greed and a casual cruelty that turned Alastair's stomach. He had fought them. He had won. But the victories left a bitter taste in his mouth. The violence had escalated, the lines had blurred. He looked at his life one day, at the blood on his hands and the fear in the eyes of everyone around him, and he saw a dead end. He saw his father's fate, and his father's before him. A short, brutal life ending in a coffin or a prison cell. He wanted more. Or perhaps, he just wanted out. So he orchestrated his own death. It was his final, most brilliant move. A masterpiece of deception. He used his considerable resources to create a new identity, scrubbing the old one from existence. The grave had been part of it. A final, definitive statement. A place for the world to mourn a man he no longer wished to be. He became Alastair Sterling. He moved to a different city, channeled his intellect and ruthlessness into legitimate business. He built a new empire, this one of brick and steel and stock portfolios. He was richer now than he had ever been. More powerful, in a way that the law could not touch. He had a few loyal men who came with him, like Marco, men who knew the truth. But to the rest of the world, Alastair Russo was a ghost, a cautionary tale whispered in back alleys. And Alastair Sterling was a quiet, intensely private billionaire. He had never married. He had never allowed himself the vulnerability of a family. His past was a locked room, and he had thrown away the key. Until today. Until this woman. He watched her stand up, her knees stiff from the cold ground. She placed a single, small wildflower, likely picked from the side of the path, at the base of the stone. A simple, heartfelt offering. Her face was thin and etched with worry, but there was a softness in her eyes, a kindness that seemed out of place in a world that had clearly been unkind to her. She looked older than she probably was. Life had been heavy. He could see it in the slump of her shoulders, the way she clutched her worn purse to her chest like a shield. Who was she? Why this grave? Why him? The name she had spoken. Alastair. Not Russo. Just Alastair. As if she knew the boy, not the monster he had become. The thought sent a strange, unfamiliar tremor through him. He signaled to Marco with a slight nod of his head. Marco understood immediately. Follow her. Learn everything. Be discreet. As the woman turned and began her slow walk toward the cemetery gates, Alastair remained rooted to the spot, his gaze fixed on the name carved into the granite. His name. For 20 years, it had been a symbol of his escape. A marker of a finished chapter. Now, seeing her touch it with such tenderness, it felt like something else entirely. It felt like an accusation. He had not just buried a name. He had buried memories. Connections. He had left people behind without a word, assuming they would forget. Assuming they would move on. He had never considered that someone, somewhere, might still be tending the memory of who he used to be. The report from Marco came that evening. It was delivered in a sealed envelope to Alastair's penthouse apartment, a sterile space of glass and chrome overlooking the city. Alastair sat in a leather armchair, a glass of untouched whiskey on the table beside him. He slit the envelope open with a silver letter opener. The contents were concise, as was Marco's way. Her name was Ilara Vance. Age 42. A widow. Her husband, a construction worker, had died in an accident 5 years prior. She had one son, Leo, aged 17. They lived in a small, mortgaged house in a rundown neighborhood on the other side of the city. The house was close to foreclosure. Ilara worked 2 part-time jobs. A cleaner at a downtown office building in the early mornings. A dishwasher at a diner in the evenings. It was not enough. Marco had included a financial summary. It was a grim portrait of a woman drowning. Medical bills from her late husband's illness. A mountain of credit card debt. And then there was the final entry. A series of large, high-interest loans from a private lender. A man named Silas Croft. A loan shark. The name was vaguely familiar to Alastair. A bottom feeder, a vulture who preyed on the desperate. Marco had added a handwritten note at the bottom of the page. Silas also controls the unaffiliated section of Blackwood Cemetery. He shakes down the families for maintenance fees. My guess is she can't afford to pay for her family plots, so she works off to the debt cleaning. Alastair's hand tightened around the papers, crinkling them. So this Silas was not just a lender. He was an extortionist. Using the resting places of the dead as leverage. It was a violation of a code so fundamental, even the most ruthless men of his father's generation would have found it repulsive. The dead were to be respected. Their families left in peace. But there was one more page in the envelope. It was a copy of a high school yearbook page from 23 years ago. Alastair's old neighborhood. There were 2 photos circled. One was of a young man with dark, intense eyes and a rebellious smirk. Alastair Rousseau. The other was of a girl with a bright, infectious laugh and hair that fell in soft waves around her shoulders. Ilara Petrova. Her maiden name. And suddenly, the memory broke through the fog of 2 decades. Ilara. She had lived 3 blocks down from him. Her father owned a small bakery that always smelled of warm bread and cinnamon. She was quiet, artistic. She used to sit on her front steps and sketch in a worn notebook. He had been a troubled kid, already on the path his father had laid out for him. He was all sharp edges and coiled anger. But she had never seemed afraid of him. She would just look up from her sketchbook and smile. A small, shy smile that made him feel, for a fleeting moment, like a normal boy. He remembered one summer afternoon. He'd gotten into a fight, had a split lip and a bruised cheekbone. He was sitting on the curb, stewing in his own rage. She had come over and sat next to him, not too close. She hadn't asked what happened. She just offered him a piece of pastry from her father's shop, still warm in its wax paper. He had taken it without a word. They had sat there in silence as the sun went down, eating the pastry. It was the kindest anyone had been to him all year. He had never forgotten that. Or he thought he had forgotten. Now, the memory was so vivid it ached. Ilara Petrova. The girl who sketched in a notebook and wasn't afraid of the neighborhood monster. He looked from the picture of the smiling girl to the cold, hard facts of Ilara Vance's life. The weight of it settled on him, heavy and suffocating. He had disappeared to save himself. He had cut every tie, erased every trace. He had never once looked back to see the ripples he left behind. He never considered that the quiet girl from down the street might have held onto the memory of a troubled boy. That she might have heard the news of his death and mourned him. And for 20 years, she had been tending his grave. Not because she was paid. But because she remembered. Because she had a good heart. A heart the world was now trying to crush. Alastair stood up and walked to the vast window that made up one entire wall of his apartment. The city lights spread out below him like a carpet of scattered jewels. A kingdom he had built on logic, on ruthlessness, on the complete and total suppression of emotion. He had rules. Rule number 1, Alastair Russo is dead. Never look back. Rule number 2, do not get involved in the small, messy lives of other people. It is a weakness. Rule number 3, emotion is a liability. He had lived by those rules for 20 years. They had kept him safe. They had made him powerful. Tonight, looking down at the city, he felt an overwhelming urge to break every single one of them. The image of Ilara on her knees in the cold cemetery, her hands raw as she cleaned his name, was burned into his mind. The memory of her small, shy smile. The taste of the pastry on a summer afternoon. These were not liabilities. They were echoes of a life he had abandoned. A life where a small act of kindness was not a strategic move, but simply kindness. This man, Silas Croft, was preying on her. He was exploiting her goodness, her grief. He was turning her devotion into a debt. Alastair felt a cold, clean anger rise within him. It was a familiar feeling, one he had not allowed himself to indulge for a very long time. It was the anger of the protector. The fury of the man who sees a line crossed. His father had taught him many things, most of them brutal. But one lesson had always stuck. You do not harm the innocent. You do not prey on the weak who have no part in the game. It is a matter of honor. Silas Croft had no honor. And he had just made the fatal mistake of bringing himself to the attention of a man who had built an empire on punishing those who broke the rules. Alastair turned from the window. His face was set, his decision made. He picked up his phone and dialed Marco's number. It rang once. "Boss," Marco answered, his voice crisp and ready. "This man, Silas Croft," Alastair said, his own voice low and steady. "I want to know everything. Every business partner, every bank account, every dirty secret. I want to own him by sunrise." There was a slight pause on the other end of the line. Marco was a loyal soldier, but he was also a pragmatist. He knew the rules. "Boss," he said, his tone cautious. "This is personal. It's not our world anymore." Alastair looked at the yearbook photo of the smiling girl. "It is now," he said, and the line went dead. For the first time in 20 years, Alastair Russo was not dead. He was just very, very quiet. And he was about to remind the world what happened when you disturbed a ghost. The storm of Alastair's past crashed against the carefully constructed dam of his present. He did not sleep that night. Instead, he sat in the darkness, the city lights his only company, and let the memories come. He remembered Ilara not just as a face, but as a presence. A quiet corner of calm in the turbulent world of his youth. He remembered seeing her carry groceries for her mother, her arms thin but determined. He remembered the time her sketchbook fell open in the wind, scattering drawings of birds and trees and flowers across the sidewalk. He had helped her gather them, his rough, calloused fingers feeling clumsy against the delicate paper. She had thanked him with that same shy smile, her cheeks flushing. It was a small, insignificant moment. A footnote in the violent novel of his early life. But now, it felt like the most important chapter. Why had he never spoken to her? Why had he never pursued that flicker of connection? He knew why. Because he knew what he was. He was poison. His world was a cage, and he would not have dreamed of dragging someone so good, so gentle, into it with him. To keep his distance was the only kindness he had been capable of offering her then. A preemptive protection. He had walked away from that neighborhood, and eventually from that life, believing he was leaving nothing of value behind. How wrong he had been. He had left behind a girl who would grow into a woman who remembered him with a fondness he had never earned. A woman who, through some strange twist of fate, was now in the crosshairs of a petty tyrant. The thought was intolerable. It was a debt. An old, unpaid debt of kindness. The pastry on the summer afternoon. The smile that asked for nothing. The 20 years of tending a lie carved in stone. He owed her. And Alastair Sterling, like Alastair Russo before him, always paid his debts. He picked up the report again, his eyes finding the details of her life. The 2 jobs. The struggle to keep a roof over her son's head. The quiet desperation that must be her constant companion. And yet, she found the time, the energy, the heart, to visit a grave. To clean it. To leave a wildflower. The sheer, unyielding goodness of it was a force of nature. It was a light in a world he knew to be dark. And he would not allow it to be extinguished. His decision was not logical. It was not good for business. It violated every principle of his new life. He did not care. Some things were more important than principles. Some things were about the soul. He had thought he had lost his long ago. Perhaps he had been wrong. He called Marco again, just before dawn. The information, Alastair said, no preamble needed. It's coming together, Marco replied. The man is sloppy. He leaves a wide trail. Financial records, shell corporations, disgruntled former associates. It's a house of cards. Good, Alastair said. I don't want to bring the house down. I want to own the house and everyone in it. And I want the deed to Alara Vance's home. Clear and free. Have it on my desk by noon. And Silas Croft? Marco asked. Arrange a meeting. His choice of venue. I want him to feel comfortable. I want him to feel in control. There was a brief silence. Boss, are you sure you want to do this yourself? Marco asked, the concern evident in his voice. I can handle it. A man like this. He's beneath you. No, Alastair said, his voice soft but unyielding. This one is mine. This one I have to do myself. It was about more than just solving a problem. It was about closing a circle. It was about honoring a memory he had tried to erase. For 20 years, he had been Mr. Sterling, a man of calculations and cold logic. But the man Silas Croft was about to meet was not Mr. Sterling. He was Alastair Rousseau. And he was coming to collect on a debt. By mid-morning, Marco's team had assembled a complete schematic of Silas Croft's life. It was not a pretty picture. Silas was a predator of the lowest order. His business was human misery. He preyed on the sick, the grieving, the recently unemployed. He operated through a dozen small, legally ambiguous companies. Payday loans, title loans, private mortgages with impossible terms. The cemetery racket was just a side business, a particularly ghoulish way to squeeze a few extra dollars from people at their most vulnerable. Alastair read the file in his office, a vast, minimalist room on the top floor of the Sterling Tower. The city sprawled beneath him, a toy set he could manipulate at will. He felt a deep, profound disgust as he absorbed the details of Silas's operations. This was not business. This was feeding on scraps. There was no art to it, no strategy. Just pure, unadulterated greed. Marco entered the office without knocking. He placed a single folder on the polished obsidian desk. The deed to the Vance property, Marco said. The mortgage was held by a subsidiary of a bank we happen to have significant influence over. The debt has been forgiven. The title is now clear. It's in her name. Alastair nodded, not looking up from the file on Silas. And the meeting? He agreed, Marco said. He was arrogant. Amused, even. He thinks you're some rich do-gooder looking to negotiate. He suggested a public place. A coffee shop near his office. Tomorrow morning. No, Alastair said. Tonight. My car will pick him up in 1 hour. He will be brought to the old warehouse. Marco's expression tightened. The warehouse. They had not used the warehouse in 15 years. It was a relic of the old life. A cold, cavernous space on the industrial outskirts of the city, where difficult conversations used to happen. Where problems were solved permanently. Boss, Marco said, his voice low. That's a different kind of message. It's the only language a man like Silas Croft understands, Alastair replied, finally closing the file. He doesn't respect money or power. He respects fear. It's time he was reminded what that feels like. The plan was simple. There would be no violence. No threats of physical harm. Alistair was past that. His power was more sophisticated now. He would simply show Silas the truth. He would show him that his entire world, his pathetic little empire of misery, now belonged to Alistair Sterling. And then, he would take it all away. An hour later, a sleek black sedan pulled up outside a grimy office building. Silas Croft stepped out, a smirk on his fleshy face. He was a man in his 50s, with a cheap suit and an expensive watch. He thought he was on his way to a negotiation. He thought he held all the cards. He got into the back of the car. The doors locked with a heavy, solid thud. The privacy screen slid up, separating him from the driver. The car did not move toward the city center. It moved toward the abandoned industrial zone. Silas's smirk began to fade. The car pulled into a dark, sprawling warehouse. The large metal door rumbled shut behind it, plunging the space into near darkness, save for a single, harsh light hanging from the ceiling. In the center of the pool of light was a simple table and 2 chairs. Alistair Sterling sat in one of them, his hands steepled in front of him. He looked calm, patient. Like a spider in the center of its web. 2 of Marco's men, dressed in simple black suits, opened Silas's door. They did not touch him. They simply stood there, their presence an unspoken command. Silas got out of the car, his bluster gone, replaced by a nervous sweat. "What is this?" he demanded, his voice a little too loud. "I agreed to a coffee shop." "Sit down, Mr. Croft," Alistair said, his voice quiet but echoing in the vast, empty space. Silas hesitated, then walked to the table and sat in the empty chair. He tried to regain some of his bravado. "Look, if this is about the Vance woman, she's a deadbeat. She owes me money. It's a simple business transaction." Alistair did not respond immediately. He just watched Silas, his gaze steady and unnervingly calm. Finally, he spoke. "Let me tell you what is going to happen, Mr. Croft," Alistair began, his tone conversational. "In about 5 minutes, your bank is going to call. They are calling in all your outstanding loans. Effective immediately. The collateral for those loans, as you know, is the ownership of your lending companies." Silas scoffed. "That's impossible. I have a long-standing relationship with my bank." "You had a long-standing relationship," Alistair corrected him gently. "As of an hour ago, I acquired a controlling interest in that bank. Your relationship is now with me." The color drained from Silas's face. "Next," Alistair continued, unperturbed, "the city's zoning commission will be opening an immediate investigation into your activities at Blackwood Cemetery. They have received an anonymous but very detailed tip regarding extortion and unlicensed business practices. Your little operation there is over." Silas started to speak, but Alistair held up a hand. "I'm not finished. The Internal Revenue Service has also received a very comprehensive file detailing years of tax evasion through a series of shell corporations registered offshore. I imagine their audit will be thorough." Alistair leaned forward slightly, his eyes cold as ice. "Your house of cards, Mr. Croft. I now own it. Every last card." Silas was breathing heavily, his face a mask of disbelief and dawning terror. "Why?" he stammered. "Over some woman?" "Over a few $1,000s. Alistair's expression did not change. "You think this is about money," he said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "You are mistaken. This is about a woman who has nothing. A woman who works 2 jobs to feed her son. A woman who is drowning in debt that you created." He paused, letting the silence hang in the air. "And despite all of that," he continued, "she finds the time to go to a cemetery and clean the grave of a man she thinks is dead. She does it not for money, not for any benefit to herself, but because she has a good heart. Because it's the right thing to do." Alistair leaned back in his chair. "You, on the other hand, Mr. Croft. You prey on people like her. You profit from their misery. You desecrate the memory of the dead for a few extra dollars. There is no honor in what you do. There is no respect. He gestured to a briefcase on the floor next to him. Marco stepped forward, opened it, and placed a single piece of paper on the table in front of Silas. It was a bill of sale. That is for the full amount of Ilara Vance's debt, Alastair said. I am buying it from you. For $1. Silas stared at the paper, then at Alastair, his mind reeling. You're insane, he whispered. Sign it, Alastair said. It was not a request. With a trembling hand, Silas took the pen offered to him and signed his name. He was signing away his last piece of leverage. He was a ruined man. He knew it. Alastair took the paper and stood up. My men will give you a ride, he said. I would suggest you find a new city to live in, Mr. Croft. And a new line of work. Because as of tonight, you no longer exist in this 1 inch. He turned and walked away, melting back into the shadows without a backward glance. Silas Croft was left sitting at the table, bathed in the single harsh light, a ghost in his own life. The threat was not just closed. It was erased. Permanently. The next day, Alastair returned to the cemetery. He did not come in his expensive car. He did not bring Marco. He drove himself, in a modest, unassuming sedan, and parked on a street a few blocks away. He walked through the iron gates, just another visitor among the stones. He carried a simple manila folder. He found her in the same spot. She was not cleaning the grave today. She was just sitting on the cold ground beside it, her head bowed. She looked smaller, more defeated than before. The weight of the world was clearly on her shoulders. Alastair walked toward her slowly, his footsteps soft on the grass. She looked up as he approached, her eyes wary, startled. Excuse me, Alastair said, his voice gentle. Are you Ilara Vance? She nodded, clutching her purse tighter. Yes. Who are you? My name is Alastair Sterling, he said. He did not offer a handshake. He did not want to intimidate her. I have something for you. He opened the folder and took out the deed. This is the title to your house, he said, holding it out to her. It is paid in full. There is no more mortgage. It's yours. Ilara stared at the paper, then at his face, her expression a mixture of confusion and disbelief. I don't understand, she stammered. This isn't possible. It is, he said simply. He then took out the loan agreement she had signed with Silas Croft. A large, red paid in full was stamped across it. This is also taken care of, he said. Your debt is gone. He will not bother you again. Tears welled in Ilara's eyes. She looked from the papers to his face, searching for an explanation. Why, she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Why would you do this? I don't even know you. Alastair's gaze drifted to the headstone beside her. To his own name. You don't know me, he agreed softly. But I know of you. He looked back at her, his eyes holding a depth of feeling he had not allowed himself to show in years. A man I respect told me about a woman who was struggling, yet still found it in her heart to tend a stranger's grave. A woman who placed a wildflower on a cold piece of stone. He paused. He told me that kind of goodness is rare. And that it should be protected. Ilara wiped a tear from her cheek with the back of her hand. But this is so much money. How can I ever repay you? It was the question he had been waiting for. He gave her a small, sad smile. You already have, he said. You have no idea what you've already given me. She looked at him, her brow furrowed in confusion. What did I give you? A reminder, he said, his voice barely a whisper. You gave me a reminder of something I thought was long dead. He was not just talking about the memory of the boy he used to be. He was talking about his own capacity for something other than ruthlessness. His capacity for good. She stared at him, this powerful, quiet stranger who had just saved her from ruin. The pieces were not fitting together in her mind, but the gratitude was overwhelming. "Who are you?" she asked again, the question more profound this time. It wasn't just a name she was asking for. It was an identity. "Are you an angel?" Alistair almost laughed. It would have been a bitter, hollow sound. An angel. He was the furthest thing from it. He was a man who had built one life on violence and another on cold ambition. But today felt different. "No," he said, his voice full of a strange, quiet sincerity. "I'm no angel." He looked at the grave, at the name they both shared in a way she could never understand. "Today," he said, more to himself than to her, "I just got to be the good guy." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a simple, elegant business card. It was blank, except for a single phone number engraved in the center. "Take this," he said, pressing it into her hand. "If you or your son ever need anything at all, you call this number. It will be answered. I promise." He folded her fingers over the card, his touch lingering for a fraction of a second. It was the first time he had touched her since they were teenagers, gathering her scattered drawings from the pavement. A jolt, like static electricity, passed between them. A recognition of something old and unspoken. He saw a flicker of it in her eyes, a question she was afraid to ask. Did she see it? A ghost of the boy she once knew in the face of this powerful stranger. He did not give her the chance to find out. He pulled his hand back and took a step away. "Your son, Leo," he said, changing the subject. "He is a good student." She nodded, still dazed. "Yes. He wants to be an engineer." "But college," her voice trailed off. "Don't worry about college," Alistair said. "Just tell him to study hard. The rest will take care of itself." It was another promise. Another debt he intended to pay. With that, he turned and walked away, leaving her standing there with the deed to her life in one hand and a lifeline to a ghost in the other. He did not look back. If he did, he was afraid he might not be able to leave. He was afraid he might tell her the truth. And the truth was a burden she did not deserve to carry. It was enough that she was safe. It was enough that he had been able to repay a kindness from a lifetime ago. As he walked, he felt lighter than he had in 20 years. The ghost of Alistair Rousseau was not a curse. It was a compass. And it had just pointed him back toward his own humanity. 5 years passed. The world turned, seasons changed, and life went on. For Elara Vance, it went on in a way she had never dared to dream. The crushing weight of debt was gone. The constant fear of losing her home vanished. She quit her job as a dishwasher and then the one as a cleaner. With a small, anonymous loan that appeared in her bank account one day, she opened a little flower shop just a few blocks from the cemetery. It was called Bilara's Blooms. It was a place of light and life and color. She had a gift for it. She arranged bouquets that seemed to capture not just beauty, but emotion. People came from all over the city to buy her flowers. She was no longer a woman drowning. She was a woman who was thriving. Her son, Leo, graduated high school at the top of his class. A letter arrived soon after from a prestigious engineering university. It offered him a full, 4-year scholarship. The Sterling Foundation Scholarship, it was called. A fund for gifted students from underprivileged backgrounds. Elara cried when she read the letter. Tears of pure, unadulterated joy. She still had the card. The one with the single phone number. She had never used it. She kept it tucked away in a small wooden box with her late husband's wedding ring and a faded photo of her parents. She knew, with a certainty she could not explain, that all of this goodness, all of this fortune, flowed from the quiet, intense man she had met in the cemetery. Alistair Sterling. She still visited the grave. But now, she brought flowers from her own shop. The most beautiful lilies and roses. She no longer whispered to the stone about her struggles. she whispered her thanks. Sometimes, as she tended the grave, she would feel a strange sense of being watched. A fleeting feeling. She would look around, but there was never anyone there. Just the wind and the silence. In a tower of glass and steel across the city, Alistair Sterling stood at his window, looking out over the empire he had built. He was older now. There was more grey at his temples. The lines on his face were deeper. But his eyes were different. The cold, hard emptiness was gone. Replaced by something softer. Something warmer. On his vast, polished desk, among the neat stacks of corporate documents and financial reports, sat a single, small object. A smooth, grey stone, no bigger than his thumb. He had picked it up from the ground near his own grave that last day. He kept it as a memento. A reminder. Marco would sometimes see him holding it, rolling it between his fingers as he made decisions worth millions of dollars. He never asked. He didn't need to. He had seen the change in his boss. The man who had suppressed all emotion for 2 decades now ran a multi-million-dollar charitable foundation. The man who had lived by the rule of non-involvement now read every single letter from the scholarship recipients, following their progress with a quiet, paternal pride. He was still a ruthless businessman. Still a man to be feared. But he was also something more. Once a year, on a cold autumn day, he still went to Blackwood Cemetery. He would lay his flowers on his parents' graves. And then, from a distance, he would watch as a woman with kind eyes and a happy smile placed a beautiful bouquet on the grave of Alistair Russo. He never approached her. He never spoke. It was enough to see that she was safe. It was enough to see that she was happy. It was the best part of his year. His secret pilgrimage of gratitude. In the end, we learn that some graves do not hold the dead. They hold the people we used to be. And sometimes, it takes an act of pure, unexpected kindness to remind us that the person we buried is not truly gone. Alistair Russo was a name on a headstone, a ghost of a violent past. But the love a good woman held for the memory of a boy, a love she showed with a soft brush and a wildflower, was strong enough to reach across 2 decades of silence. It did not resurrect the man who had been, but it redeemed the man who was. It taught him that true power is not the ability to destroy, but the choice to protect. And that the most profound debts are not of money, but of the heart, paid back not in coin, but in the quiet, enduring promise to be the good guy, even if just for a day.